Washington, D.C. in the 1940s was a city transformed by the thunder of global conflict, a place where the weight of the world rested on marble steps and whispered through oak-paneled halls. As World War II raged across oceans and continents, the nation's capital became the nerve center of power, a beacon of strategy and resolve amid the darkness of uncertainty. The air hummed with urgency, the distant rumble of military trucks rolling down Constitution Avenue, the sharp crack of typewriters in government offices left open in summer to catch a breeze, the murmur of diplomats in shadowed corridors carrying briefcases stamped with classified markings. Smoke from coal furnaces and the new wartime factories drifted through the streets, mixing with the delicate, fleeting scent of cherry blossoms in spring that somehow managed to bloom even as the world burned. Ration books, blackout curtains, and the constant presence of uniforms reminded every resident, whether lifelong Washingtonian or fresh arrival, that war touched even the heart of democracy. This was D.C. not as a tourist's postcard of white marble and monuments, but as a living, breathing hub where decisions shaped the fate of millions. From the White House war rooms where maps of Europe and the Pacific were covered in colored pins, to the crowded boarding houses of wartime workers sleeping in shifts, the city pulsed with a mix of fear, hope, and unyielding determination. The capital of the United States had always been a place of ceremony and power, but during World War II it became something more. The nerve center of the free world, a place where strategy was born, alliances were forged, and the course of history was charted in late-night meetings and urgent telegrams. The city's wide avenues, laid out by Pierre l'Enfant in the 18th century, now carried the weight of modern warfare. Trucks hauling supplies, diplomats rushing to meetings, and civilians lining up for their ration stamps. The Potomac River, lazy and brown in summer, reflected the changing skyline as temporary buildings sprouted like weeds on the National Mall. The scent of fresh paint and lumber mixed with the river's muddy odor, a constant reminder that the city was adapting, growing, straining under the demands of war. The 1940s dawned on Washington, D.C. with the shadows of the Great Depression still lingering in the corners of people's lives. Unemployment had eased somewhat with New Deal programs like the Works Progress Administration, which had built roads, parks, and public buildings across the district, employing thousands of workers who hammered nails and mixed concrete under the hot sun or in the pouring rain. But the city still carried the memory of breadlines snaking around soup kitchens and shuttered businesses with closed signs gathering dust in their windows. Then came September 1, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland and the war in Europe began. The news reached D.C. through crackling radios in living rooms. Extra editions of the Washington Post and Evening Star hawked on street corners with bold headlines, and urgent cables arriving at the State Department. The city began to stir from its economic slumber. By 1940, as Hitler's forces swept through France and the Battle of Britain raged in the skies over London, Washington felt the pull of preparation. The streets, lined with neoclassical buildings of white marble and red brick, echoed with the footsteps of bureaucrats hurrying to meetings, their leather briefcases swinging at their sides. The Potomac River flowed steadily past, its waters reflecting the dome of the Capitol, a symbol of stability in unstable times. The air carried the faint smell of river mud and exhaust from Model T Fords and newer Chevrolets sharing the roads with horse-drawn carts in some older neighborhoods. Cafes along Pennsylvania Avenue served black coffee and simple sandwiches to men in fedoras and women in sensible dresses, discussing the latest news from abroad in hushed tones. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's fireside chats crackled over radios in living rooms across the city, his voice calm and reassuring, urging the nation toward readiness while carefully balancing isolationist sentiment with the growing need to support the Allies. The Lend-Lease Act of 1941, signed into law in March, funneled aid to Britain, China, and later the Soviet Union, and DC's offices buzzed with activity, clerks typing manifests of tanks, planes, and food shipments, diplomats negotiating terms with foreign delegations in wood-paneled meeting rooms, the air thick with the smell of mimeograph ink and fresh coffee brewed in endless pots. The city's parks, like Lafayette Square across from the White House, became places for quiet reflection, the scent of grass and blooming flowers a brief respite from the growing tension. People strolled under the oaks, feeding pigeons breadcrumbs from their lunch, discussing the war in low voices, wondering if America could stay out of it. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941 shattered the morning calm. The news spread like wildfire, radios blaring in living rooms and offices, extra editions of the Washington Post hawked on street corners with bold headlines screaming, "Japan attacks," and "U.S. fleet bombed." The city held its breath. Crowds gathered outside the White House, faces pale with shock and anger, some women clutching handkerchiefs to their mouths, men removing hats in silent respect for the dead. Roosevelt's address to Congress the next day, declaring it a date which will live in infamy, was broadcast live over loudspeakers and printed in special editions that sold out within hours. Overnight, D.C. became the command center for a nation at war. Military officers in crisp uniforms flooded the streets, their boots clicking on sidewalks, briefcases chained to wrists. The War Department swelled with staff, overflowing into temporary buildings hastily erected on the mall, long, low tempos of plywood and tar paper, their interiors smelling of fresh lumber, paint, and the constant hum of electric fans trying to move the humid air. Rationing began almost immediately: gasoline, sugar, rubber, meat, coffee, shoes. Residents lined up at distribution centers for their ration books, the paper crisp under their fingers, stamps carefully allotted for each household. Victory gardens sprouted in backyards, on rooftops, and in vacant lots across the city, the earthy smell of turned soil and growing tomatoes a symbol of self-reliance. Blackout drills became routine, curtains drawn tight at dusk, lights dimmed or extinguished, the city plunging into darkness as air raid wardens patrolled with flashlights, their whistles piercing the night, the silence broken only by the low hum of the Potomac and the occasional bark of a dog. The scent of fear was in the air, mixed with determination. People taped windows against bomb blasts that never came, but the drills built a sense of preparedness. The government printed posters, loose lip sink ships, buy war bonds, plastered on every lamppost and bus stop, the ink fresh and bold. Power in D.C. during the war meant the White House as the epicenter. Franklin D. Roosevelt, confined to his wheelchair but commanding in presence, met daily with advisors in the Oval Office. The room smelled of pipe tobacco, strong coffee brewed in the small kitchenette nearby, and the faint scent of leather from the maps spread across tables and hung on walls. Colored pins marked Allied advances in North Africa, the Pacific Islands, the Normandy beaches after June 6, 1944. Winston Churchill visited several times, his cigar smoke lingering in the halls, his voice booming as he debated strategy with FDR into the early hours, sometimes until dawn. The map room, originally a children's playroom on the ground floor, became a war nerve center, telegrams clattering in from fronts around the world, the air thick with tension and tobacco. The furniture was simple: tables, chairs, a large globe, but the decisions made their changed history. Eleanor Roosevelt moved through the city like a force of nature, visiting hospitals filled with wounded soldiers returned from Europe and the Pacific, inspecting defense plants where women riveted aircraft parts, speaking on the radio to urge women to join the workforce. Her perfume, light and floral, trailed her as she walked hospital corridors, shaking hands with young men missing limbs, listening to their stories with quiet intensity. She wrote her daily column, My Day, in a small office, the typewriter keys clicking steadily, describing the sacrifices and courage she saw everywhere. The White House gardens were turned into victory gardens, the scent of fresh vegetables mixing with the formal rose bushes. Congress was a hive of activity. Senators and representatives debated war bonds, the draft, Lend-Lease aid, the internment of Japanese Americans on the West Coast, the creation of the Office of Strategic Services. The Senate and House chambers smelled of polished wood, cigar smoke from private offices, and the ink of fresh legislation being drafted. Pages darted through marble corridors carrying messages, their footsteps echoing off the stone floors. The Supreme Court weighed wartime measures, cases involving censorship, rationing, civil liberties, the constitutionality of emergency powers. The marble halls were cool and quiet, the air scented with old books and wax polish, the weight of history palpable in every decision. Debates raged over the War Powers Act, the Selective Service Act, funding for the Manhattan Project, though few knew its true purpose at the time. The scent of tension was in the air, mixed with the sweat of long hours and the ink of bills passed in haste. Military presence was everywhere. Soldiers in khaki uniforms drilled on the ellipse behind the White House, their boots thumping in unison, sergeants barking orders in sharp cadence. Parades marched down Constitution Avenue, bands playing The Stars and Stripes Forever and Anchors Aweigh, the brass instruments gleaming in the sun, the crowd's cheers mingling with the scent of popcorn from vendors and the faint perfume of women waving flags. The Pentagon's construction began in September 1941 on what had been Arlington farmland, a massive undertaking that employed thousands of workers around the clock. The ground shook with bulldozers and pile drivers, the air filled with dust, fresh concrete, and the smell of hot asphalt. By January 1943, the building was occupied. 5 sides, 5 stories above ground, 2 below, 6.5 million square feet of floor space, 33,000 workers moving through its corridors like blood through arteries. Messengers rode bicycles to deliver urgent memos, their tires squeaking on polished floors, the hallways echoing with footsteps and the clatter of teletype machines. The Pentagon became a symbol of American might, its endless hallways a maze where secrets were kept and plans were hatched. Daily life for ordinary people in D.C. was a balance of sacrifice and solidarity. The population boom created housing shortages that were acute. Rooms were rented in shifts, day sleepers and night workers sharing the same bed, sheets changed between shifts. Boarding houses overflowed, with "rooms for rent" signs in every window from Foggy Bottom to Capitol Hill. Apartments smelled of shared cooking, cabbage soup, Spam casseroles, victory cake made without eggs or butter using applesauce as a substitute. Women took jobs in offices and factories, their nylons rationed, so they drew seams on their legs with eyebrow pencils to simulate stockings. The scent of mimeograph ink and typewriter ribbon filled government buildings as clerks processed endless forms for draft notices, ration coupons, war bond drives. Children collected scrap metal, rubber, paper, and cooking fat, their wagons rattling down streets, the metallic clang announcing their patriotic duty. Neighborhoods like Georgetown with its cobblestone streets and gas lamps felt timeless, while Anacostia and Shaw buzzed with diverse communities. Black families facing segregation but contributing to the war effort through double V campaigns for victory abroad and at home. The smell of barbecue from backyard grills on weekends mixed with the sound of church bells calling congregations to prayer for the troops overseas. The government girls, young women from across the country, lived in crowded dormitories, the air filled with the scent of cold cream and hairspray, gossiping about dates with soldiers and the latest war news. The war touched every corner of life. Air raid drills sent residents to basements, the wail of sirens piercing the night, blackout curtains drawn, the city dark as a tomb. Children practiced duck and cover at school, crawling under desks while teachers counted slowly to 10. The radio was the voice of the nation, FDR's fireside chats, Edward R. Murrow reporting from London, the crackle of news bulletins. Families gathered around sets in living rooms, the glow of the dial the only light in darkened rooms. The smell of popcorn and coffee filled the air as they listened to reports of D-Day, the Battle of the Bulge, the island-hopping campaign in the Pacific. The cultural life of the city adapted to war. Movies at the Warner Theater and the Capitol showed newsreels before features, images of tanks rolling, bombers taking off, soldiers landing on beaches. Audiences sat in silence, the popcorn forgotten, as the screen showed the reality of the fight. USO shows brought Hollywood stars to bases and hospitals, Bob Hope cracking jokes, Marlene Dietrich singing, the Andrews sisters harmonizing, their laughter and songs a brief escape. The National Gallery of Art, opened in 1941, offered free admission and solace. People wandered through rooms of paintings, the cool marble floors echoing, the air scented with oil paint and old canvas. The war also brought profound social change. African Americans, many of them part of the Great Migration, worked in war industries, but segregation remained harsh. The Double V campaign, victory abroad and at home, gained strength. Black newspapers like the Afro-American reported on discrimination in federal hiring, the smell of ink and paper in crowded newsrooms. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers. Rosie the Riveter was real here, welding in shipyards, typing in offices, the smell of welding torches and mimeograph fluid following them home. The city's diversity, white, black, Jewish, immigrant, created a rich, if tense, social fabric. The end of the war in 1945 brought relief and exhaustion. VE Day on May 8, 1945, filled the streets with cheering crowds. People danced on Pennsylvania Avenue, kissed strangers, the air filled with the sound of horns, bells, and tears. VJ Day in August brought even greater celebration. The smell of fireworks, the taste of beer freely poured, the sound of church bells ringing across the city. The war was over, but the city had changed forever. The tempos remained, the Pentagon stayed, the federal government grew larger. Washington, D.C. was no longer just the capital of a nation. It was the capital of a superpower. The 1940s left an indelible mark on Washington, D.C. A city of marble and memory, of sacrifice and triumph, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The war years showed what the capital could be when the world needed it most. A place of power, yes, but also of purpose, of quiet courage, of hope that refused to die. The cherry blossoms still bloomed each spring, the Potomac still flowed, the monuments stood sentinel, but the city and its people were forever changed by the years of struggle and victory. If this journey through 1940s Washington, D.C. moved you, made you think about the weight of history carried in these streets, please hit that subscribe button. Let's keep walking through time together, one decade at a time. Thank you for listening.